So let's start tonight. Um,
You just wanted to get us riled up.
I did. That's my goal. That's the only thing I'm good at.
Chicago
Is getting people riled up.
$120,000.
Oh, there you go. Well, he
Well,
won't.
he probably has a GoFundMe.
Yeah, probably.
I'm sure.
Well, yeah,
I'm sure
they-
that the Obamas will pay it.
They paid that woman who accused Kavanaugh $1 million. I mean, this is the new best way to, it used to be a big deal. They check your bank account and see who is paying you to do what, and they could arrest people for all that stuff. Well, now all of a sudden they have the perfect money laundering scheme called GoFundMe. So you want to pay off your people who will lie for you, then you just start a GoFundMe page and they get all the money and it's completely above board, and it's like the world is just okay. But again, that's got not anything directly to do with what we're talking about. So now we'll start the message. You can erase that first part there. So I've been, I always look at the Torah portions. We've talked about the Torah portions. Every week there's a different part of the Torah they read. And, so I like to keep up with all that stuff. And I, at some point, would really like to do that every week to do, the Torah portions. But it's hugely long because they cover 6, 8, 10, 12 chapters and 2 or 3 different books. And it's difficult to give. It's difficult for me to just cherry pick a couple of cool things because I want to stop everyone and go, oh, this is cool, that's cool, you need to know this, which is true, it's all good. But I've been reading along the Torah portions, and recently, last 5 or 6 weeks, they've been in the end part of Exodus, just started the beginning part of Leviticus, and it's all about the Mishkan, the temple. And that's what's contained in those, the implements and the things that they do, and the offerings and the clean and unclean and all that stuff. And the whole temple thing is awesome because it describes in great detail. There's like 5 chapters of I need this many silver fittings and I need that many bronze things and I got to have this color of deal here and those are gold over there, and all of those things are really specific. And it's, like I say, 5 chapters in the book of Exodus. And they're all hugely meaningful because you look, gold is deity, silver is redemption, brass is judgment. You look at the colors of everything about it is the candlestick. We could do like 3 weeks just on the candlestick. And it's very cool stuff. But if I had to shoot a long 30,000 foot view of this, there are a couple of interesting things I wanted to bring up. So before we get to that, one of the things that always bugged me was, and it didn't bug me. I mean, you read the Bible and you think, well, I wouldn't do it that way. Or why did it read that way? And one of those things is Moses is going up to the mount to meet with the Lord. He's going to get what we call the 10 Commandments. He's going to get all these instructions on the Mishkan. He's going to get, whatever it is the Lord's going to give to him. And he's gone for 40 days, right? The Lord is talking to him for 40 days. Well, I'm human and old, and I think to myself, well, that's ridiculous. Somebody's going to talk to me for 40 days and I'm going to remember all of it? Of course not. So that means the Lord must somehow be able to imprint or recall these things for Moses so he can relay. And so if that's true, then why did it take 40 days? He could have just, dropped it on him like we download stuff today. So that whole 40-day thing always struck me as I need to look into that at some point because it seems odd. So keep that in mind. That will come later in the message, but think that through. So where I want to start tonight is Exodus 25, verse 1, and this is, this is after all the Moses goes up, gets the thing, comes back, goes up, comes back. Actually went up and down 3 times. They've moved to a couple of different camps. We're 12 chapters plus past all of that stuff. So at this point, the Lord, this is Exodus 25:1. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they may bring me an offering. Of every man that giveth willingly with his heart, you shall take my offering." So, thinking that through, that to me, just sort of, it's another nail in the coffin, if you will, about this whole thing. When we've talked about it with the marriage and stuff, of community. Our salvation relationship is personal, and the Lord will meet us wherever we are and deal with that in an appropriate manner if we'll let him do it. And it's a one-on-one thing. When you get to heaven, you're going to stand at the bema seat. You're going to stand in front of the Lord himself, and you're by yourself. The pastor's not holding your hand. Nobody's there to make excuses. It's between you and the Lord. It's a personal thing. But this whole walk of following the Lord is a community thing too. We have to be part of the community. We have to care for the community. The things that we do and think and say and act, they affect the community, and we need to present ourselves in a way that is responsible to the Lord, right? We want people to see him in us. We want to live in such a way that the world can see who he is. And if that were not true, this idea of community wouldn't matter. But it is true, and it does matter. And we have a responsibility, not certainly just for our own personal salvation, but to the community as a larger whole. So he's saying here to Moses, "Speak unto the children of Israel, that they may bring me an offering of every man that giveth willingly with his heart." Okay, so it's a community thing. And as we go through this, bless you, this offering is going to be the things that are needed to build the tabernacle. Everybody's going to pluck an earring off, or a gold ring, or a purple jacket, or whatever it is. They're going to make this offering, give it to Moses, and then Moses will allow it to be used to, the metal will all be melted down, and I assume the jackets will be de-threaded, and, who knows how it's going to work. But the Lord is asking for this offering. And remember, we've talked about everything in Scripture is cyclical. We end and start at the same place. So where did we start? Right? We started in the garden. God created us, and then it says the Lord breathed the breath of life into Adam. And then the very next verse is, "And he took them and planted him in the garden eastward in Eden." So that's pretty much the beginning. That's where we've been. And if you recall from the other night, week, whatever it was, we were talking about the Garden of Eden. That word garden is gone. It means a fenced or protected area. And then Eden is delight. And then Kadem is the word for eastward, which is moving towards God. So this whole idea of eastward, the Garden of Eden, is this protected area of God's delight moving towards God. That's where he started Adam. That's where he started us. So if this idea of a cyclical, you end where you start is true, then we are going to end up in the same place that we started, which would be in a protected area of God's delight, eastward, Kadem, towards God. That we should expect that. And of course, as Christians, we all expect that we'll wind up in heaven, right? Or some reasonable facsimile thereof. That's the same place, right? It's this protected area of God's delight. It's eastward towards God. And however you want to view heaven, here, there, or in Kansas, that's still, we will end up in the place that we started. So the age-old philosophical question is, why am I here? What is the point of us being here? And we were just talking about people killing themselves. Those people no longer can answer that question. There's no purpose in their life. I don't know. I suppose you could get to a point where life beats you down so much, and certainly every, Tuesday at 2, I feel like that. that you're just, I don't care anymore. But eventually you have to, you just do. That's the way the Lord has wired you. And you start asking, well, why am I here? And if you can't come up with an answer for that, then life is, I would assume, meaningless, different, harder. If there's no purpose in your life, what keeps you going during the day? And of course, the answer is fairly straightforward. There are hundreds of, probably thousands, probably tens of thousands of books attempting to answer that question, and every college has, 4-year programs basically answering that question, and every philosopher since there have been philosophers has attempted to answer that question, and I really don't see the issue. God is pretty specific. He put Adam in the garden so that he could fellowship with him. We're going to talk about the Mishkan, the temple, and remember we've talked about this before when Moses was on the mountain and the Lord said, I want you to build a temple for me to live with you guys. He was confused. As man can't build a structure compatible with the God of all creation. But he's willing to do it. And as the rest of Scripture goes on, you will find this repeats several more times until the final, the end, the New Jerusalem, Revelation, past, however you want to look at it, is what? You go to a place where you live with God, because that's his desire. That's always been his desire. So what is your purpose? Why am I here? You're here to serve God, of course, and to bring him delight, right? That was his desire from before the beginning of time. Before he created, the things that I showed you up there, before there was anything, his desire was to create a people that he could fellowship with, that would bring him delight, that he could dwell with. And that's, again, this word grace is camping, encamping. He wanted to create some people that he could camp with. And if this was a Star Trek episode, I would see Captain Kirk as being, the guy who's talking God off the ledge, and Spock would be, well, this is illogical. And Bones would be back there saying, well, this is bad. We got to get back on the road, whatever. It's not like that. I don't know how it is, but I know it's not like that. God is not so lonely he needed to create us. I'm not sure what his motivation was. We're not told what his motivation is, other than he wants to create a people that he can live with, that he can dwell with, that will bring him delight, that he can call his inheritance. And that's not typically how we view the relationship with us and God. But that's absolutely what the Bible says. So God gives Moses these instructions for building the Mishkan. And that's the section that you would be in if you were in the Torah portions. And as 21st century American Christians, we tend to miss everything in the middle, and we kind of are familiar with the end, but we're definitely looking forward to the end, right? To this whole idea of the New Jerusalem and getting to spend our eternity with him. And we think, and not incorrectly or unjustifiably, but we think that will be a very cool thing for us. We'll get to go to heaven, and everybody says, oh yeah, we'll cast our crowns and we'll spend all eternity praising God, and it'll just be awesome and great and all that. And it will be, I'm guessing. I can't imagine it would be anything else. But the purpose is not for us. God created all this because he wanted to. He wanted to delight in a relationship with us. So the whole concept from beginning to end is about him, not about us. And we again, 21st century American Christians tend not to look at it that way. We like to look at it more about us, but realize it's got very little to do with us. So Exodus 31:13 says, and this again is in the context of the Mishkan, and this is several Torah portions, so there's probably 30 hours of legitimate teaching here, so it might seem a little choppy. Exodus 31:13, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout our generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defiles it shall surely be put to death, for whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among my people. Okay, well that seems straightforward enough and fairly harsh. The Sabbaths are a time for us and God, or for what he says. It's funny. The verse says, let's see, what does it say? It says for me and you. Is that right? Whatever it is.
Between me and you.
Between me and you. So I type that in, and then I always have the spell checker look at it because I can't spell when by myself. And it that spell checks incorrectly. It should be you and me, right? Grammatically, that's not correct.
Right.
But that is the picture. It's him and us, not us and him. It's for him, not for us. He created us for him, not him for us. And sometimes we don't see it that way. And then it talks about defiling, profaning the Sabbath will result in death. Now, I would imagine everyone in this room has profaned the Sabbath, and you can be as liberal or as specific as you want with that term. And we're all still here. So it's clearly not a physical death. I'm guessing it's a spiritual death, the same finer point that was made in the garden with the Nakash and Eve. So they were in the garden. They got this same, oh, that's not what he means. You surely won't die. They didn't die physically. They died spiritually. They were cast from the garden. So the entire book, from Genesis chapter 3 all the way through to Revelation 22, is the account of how is God going to bring us back. That rampart, that cycle, that revolution, how is he going to bring us back into fellowship with him to the point where we're camping with him again? That's the entire book. So one of the first steps up that long staircase to the tabernacle in the New Jerusalem, one of the first steps is keep the Sabbath holy. And typically we're not that good at it. Even if you want to consider the Sabbath to be Sunday, we're not that awesome at it. We might go to church, but typically we don't devote the day to him. So I'm glad you guys are here on the actual Sabbath, or near to be the Sabbath. It's hard to tell with all the snow now. Okay, so I started off by asking, why did it take 40 days? Why was Moses on the mountain for 40 days? Twice. Went up for 40 days, came back down. Why would the Lord, he already knew the people were about to build this golden calf. Why couldn't he have sent Moses down a day early, 39 days, and just nipped that whole golden calf thing in the bud? Because in their defense, a Hebrew will recognize 40 as a bad thing, because 40 is always a sign of tribulation. So if Moses has gone 39 days, they're good with it. But when he's gone 40 days, that means tribulation. And so they need to come up with a different plan. And certainly God knew that. And certainly Moses knew that. So there had to be a reason why it was 40 days and why he didn't send them a day early to nip the golden calf at the bud. And I would suggest looking at those people. What do we know about those people? I mean, the golden calf was created because they felt Moses was gone. The tribulation had befallen him. He wasn't coming back. It's been 40 days. He's not coming back. So we need to come up with a different way to worship the Lord. A different way to worship the Lord. They're still worshiping the Lord, but Moses wasn't here to instruct them. So they didn't know what to do. They had no instruction. And what they knew was generations back, because they'd lived in Egypt all their lives. Their parents had lived in Egypt all their lives. Their parents had lived in Egypt all their lives. It was some 200 years previous before they were Jewish people doing Jewish things living in Israel, or in Egypt. So they didn't know anything else. They applied the only thing they knew. How would you worship God? Well, this is how we did it in Egypt. We had a thing, it could be a golden crocodile or whatever the Egyptian gods worship. So let's make us a golden calf and let's call that the God of Israel and worship that. So you can kind of see how they fell into that. And it wasn't that their hearts were to run away from God, because it had been just 40 some odd days previous to that. Moses went up for the first time, heard apparently a synopsis of the story, came back down, shared it with the people, and they said, remember, we hear and obey all that you said. We're going to do all these things. So then he turns around, goes back up, is there for 40 days, brings tablets back, the tables of stone back, finds the golden calf, breaks them, grinds up all the gold, makes them drink it, goes back up the mountain, tells God, you've got to forgive these people because this is what you said and this is who you are and you're doing it, or I'm not going with you. He does. He did everything he was asked to do. Forgives the people. There 40 days, comes back down again with the new tables of stone that he had to drag up there. That's sort of the story, right? Why did God see that it had to happen that way? It doesn't seem efficient. It seems unnecessary.
Maybe he was testing the people.
He was testing the people.
Because they did a lot more than just make the calf. Weren't they just having
Yeah,
sex with
there.
anybody?
Well, see, that's the deal. There were some that were partying naked and doing all sorts of stuff, but not all were, right? But they had to wait the 40 days, because after the 40 days, when all this breaks loose, then they realized, after Moses came back, then they realized that they needed the instruction of God and the leader of God. Because just having a heart to follow God wasn't enough. After 40 days, they were building golden calves and dancing naked in the street. But they still wanted to follow the Lord. So then there's the story of what happened to those people, and a bunch of them were slain. They didn't make it past that. Those were the people, I would suggest, that were the ones dancing naked in the street and completely abandoned the Lord, probably never really with him in the first place. So the 40 days did two things. It sort of culled the herd a little bit, because it got rid of those dancing naked in the street people, and it showed firsthand to the people that they needed the instruction of God, and they needed a leader from God. They needed a priest. They needed to be able to interact with God, because 40 days was too long for them. They couldn't be without that long. Even though their hearts were to worship him, they would get so far off the track so fast, it would be tragic for them. So I'm thinking that God had to set all that up so that they could see in their own hearts why they needed this Mishkan, why they needed a temple in their midst that God would dwell in, why they needed the instructions written down for them that Moses would be doing here shortly, why they needed the Torah and the temple. Had God just right out of the bag handed them the book of instructions and put up the temple and said, I'm going to live here, I suspect that they, and I suspect that because I know that's what I would do, if I hadn't seen my need for it, it wouldn't matter to me. It wouldn't mean anything to me. It took them 40 days to see their need for it because Moses came back and told them the way it was, and God kind of told them the way it was, and they got a whole new understanding of this God thing. And if you remember back in Exodus, those people who left Egypt were going to have to be required to come to know God in a more intimate way than their ancestors did. And this is part and parcel to that, I think. So, when we look at the Mishkan, that's where we started with this, is Moses, God told Moses to take an offering of those who had a heart to give. So they plucked the earrings from their ears and their rings from their fingers and whatever valuable things they had, they gave to Moses so that they could be built into this Mishkan for God to live in. That's the same story in a sense as creation. God, there was nothing. God built all this stuff and then out of it made this entire universe. And out of the universe, there was this place called Earth that he put his people. And within Earth, he took Adam and put him in a specific spot. Excuse me. This is the same picture. It's like I was telling Gary. He likes science fiction books, right? Science fiction books to me are just westerns in space. It's the same story, except you have blasters instead of guns and you have spaceships instead of horses. But it's the same story. This is the same story. He created all this stuff, the universe, the world, the garden, to put man in. Then a few years later, we get this account of Moses going up to get the tables of stone from the Lord. He provided the tables of stone, wrote in it with his fingers, his instructions, came back, Moses smashed them, and he said, now you got to make the next set of tables of stone. Bring them back up, I'll rewrite them. So then we find out that what he's done is it's the same words. It's exactly, well, not, it's two words different, but it's almost exactly the same words, but this time it's written in our heart. So in a sense, if you squint hard enough, it's the same picture as creation in that the Lord is taking us to a different place, to a place where he can be together with us. Then right after that, we see this Mishkan. Asks everybody, okay, give me whatever you want to give me. I'm not commanding you to give, this, that, or the other. Give me what's in your heart. And out of that stuff, we're going to make this Mishkan, this tabernacle, this place for God to dwell. And it's another of the creation accounts, right? He's creating another place so that he can dwell with his people. And we'll see this at least one more time. In the end, he's creating this new Jerusalem, a place where he can dwell with his people. So it's always the same sort of story. It's the same cycle, which, in case you don't believe me, Psalm 23:3, it says, he restoreth my soul, he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Right? You've all got that. Everybody's heard that. We've all read that. The next one will show you, there it is, the paths of righteousness. That word paths in English is the word magal in Hebrew. It's a track or a rampart. And it's translated as path. Well, we don't use the word rampart, but that was the area around the top of the walled city. And any sort of walled city, if you start at the gate and you run all the way around the wall, the rampart, until you're at the end, you're back to the beginning again. It's from the word agal, which means to revolve, chamber, or circular. So, paths of righteousness is a cycle of righteousness. It's a circle of righteousness. This righteousness is this idea, I suggest, of God wanting to dwell with his people. And it comes up at the very beginning, comes up at the very end, and several times in the middle. Isaiah 46:10, you guys should all know this by heart. Declaring, this is in English, of course, declaring the end from the beginning and from my ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do with all my pleasure. It doesn't really say that in Hebrew. It says declaring Akri Rashith, and you probably know Rashith, beginning. Akri is end. So he says declaring the end at the beginning. We tend to look at that sort of backwards. He's declaring the end. I mean, it says the end from the beginning, but in English, but in Hebrew, the end it's the same story. He can declare the beginning, but in that, he's also telling you about the end. And we tend not to look at it that way. Again, we're linear people. We're starting here and we're going there. We're going to end up over there. But we're not. We're going to end up back here where we started. Okay, so building the Mishkan, Exodus 40:35 is where we'll start with that. And Moses was not able, okay, this is after the Mishkan had been built, and we're again 15 chapters hence. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of the congregation because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in their journeys. But when the cloud was not taken up, they journeyed not until the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and the fire was on it by night, in the sight of all the houses of Israel throughout all their journeys. So the Mishkan in the desert, was a picture of both the Garden of Eden and the New Jerusalem to come, I would suspect, because God inhabited it. So he took all the earrings and silver rings and purple coats and whatever from the people that they wanted to give, and they had this big pile of stuff. And what they created out of it was something I would suggest better than the sum of all the parts, right? You took a bunch of gold and silver and whatever, but you created something that God actually lives in. I mean, the God of all creation has come down. It just seems bizarre to even think it. And this is what had Moses so confused. The God of all creation is going to come down and live in a house I built for you? I mean, I'm a good builder, but, for God? That seems crazy. So he has this pile of parts and pieces that everybody's given a few dollars worth of stuff, and all of a sudden this is going to be transformed into something far bigger than the sum of all the parts. And that is the idea of the Torah portion. It's this concept of the significance of the insignificant. Think about it when like 1 grain of sand is not a beach. But to get a beach, you have to start with a grain of sand, right? 1 second is not an eon, but to have any eons, you have to start with a second. 1 day is not a year, but every year starts with a day. That's the idea. It's trying, I think, that the Torah portion is trying to share is you, me, we seem probably in our own minds insignificant because we're not the president, we're not even the pastor. We do our own thing and the people at work appreciate us and our family appreciates us, but nobody really even knows us. There's 7 billion people on earth. There have been something like 9 trillion people that have lived on earth. And if more than a handful even know your name, you're somebody special. We are basically insignificant. And I suspect that some of these people that we were talking about before that might be inclined to kill themselves might see their lives as just being pointless and insignificant. And why am I even here? Why? And it's a legitimate question. Why am I here? And if you can't answer that, if you don't know that you're here for the delight of God, then really what is your purpose? Because you are insignificant. It's unlikely you're ever going to be a star football player or the president of the United States or Billy Graham. You're going to be you. And you're insignificant. But the Torah is telling you you're not insignificant. Because the Mishkan, the temple that housed the creator of the universe wouldn't be possible if you hadn't given your earring. That beach couldn't be there if there wasn't the first grain of sand. There is great significance to the insignificant. Every time the cloud would raise from the temple and would move, the people would have to follow it. Okay, how hard can that be, right? Well, now you have this Mishkan you have to move. And if you've read Exodus and you know the cloths had to be folded in a certain way and they were 40 feet long and 8 feet tall, and all of the hundreds of little silver clasps and the gold anchors and the big brass, all this stuff had to go. Well, how did it get from this camp to that one? Well, a bunch of guys had to move it. Well, who are those guys? I don't know. It doesn't mention them in the Bible. How did this temple even come to be? There are 2 guys mentioned in the Bible. 2 guys, craftsmen. They must have had hundreds of people working with them. Mm-hmm. Who? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But without those people, that temple wouldn't have been there. Without the people to give the gold, the temple wouldn't have been there. The significance of the insignificant is unestimatable, I guess, is a way you could phrase that. So we tend to look at our lives, I tend to look at my life as being pretty insignificant. I am nothing to nobody. There are a few people, you're right, okay, there's a couple people who will say, there's only a few people that would even admit to knowing me. Right? It's just not, it's the circle I run in. I just don't, I live in Eagle, Colorado. If I knew every person in Eagle, Colorado intimately, I'd only know, 3,000 people? Big deal. Out of billions? Trillions? It's nothing. So we tend not to see the significance of each individual person, but the Torah sees that. And the Torah portion, this is one of the Torah portions, is the significance of the insignificant. And it's encouraging to know that you don't need to be King Nebuchadnezzar or the Pharaoh of Egypt or whatever. But without you, there'd be no temple. It just wouldn't happen, because that's how significant you are. So God desires to dwell with his people. You're not insignificant. It's his desire to camp with you, to build a place that travels with you, to be there all the time. And Jesus would later relate the story of if one sheep was lost, he would go after it. It's one insignificant sheep. He had a whole yard full, but one leaves, he's going to go after it. So that's, and I didn't actually check, but I'm guessing that might be part of the New Testament reading for those that get added to the Torah portions. that Jesus would come get that one sheep. Okay, so let's go to Leviticus 1:2. It said, "And the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man bring you an offering to the Lord, ye shall bring your offering of cattle, even the herd of the flock." Temple of the congregation. So can you guess that's the word Mishkan? It's not. It should be, but it's not. The word used there is ohel, and it's the word in Hebrew for tent. It actually means that it's conspicuous at a great distance. So again, think about this in terms of the significance of the insignificant. The temple, which would house God, and has people like us visit it to be with God, is something that's visible, conspicuous at a great distance. Everyone sees it. And he's not just talking about the people in Israel, he's talking about everyone. The world will see this. The world will see the people like us, the insignificant people like us, as they're attached to this temple and attached to this God. And that's exactly the picture he wants to have. So he was talking about offerings, and that's one of the Torah portions that followed the significance to insignificant, is about offerings. And we think, okay, there it is. The word for offering is korban. It means offering. It's from the word karab, which means to approach or draw near. So as 21st century American Christians, we read what they typically call the Old Testament, and you read about these offerings where they take a perfectly good cow or sheep or bull or goat or whatever, and they kill it. And we think, oh my gosh, that is so barbaric. And it seems totally unnecessary. An offering is how you draw near or approach God. Now, one of the things that we get, most Christians, most American Christians, don't understand about offerings is they're completely voluntary. Almost every offering is totally, completely voluntary. You do it because you want to do it. Well, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to take my prize steer and go into the temple and have it killed? Well, sometimes you will learn things about God that you didn't previously know. And at that point then, you will discover that you have sinned involuntarily, but you've sinned. You've somehow crossed a line that God didn't want you to cross, even though you didn't know, but now you know. So what do? Well, of course, you want to apologize to God, right? Well, how is it that you draw near to God? Korban. You make an offering to him. Well, the Lord lays out the offerings through 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 chapters in Leviticus, what an offering looks like, what an offering is. And it tells you how you make the offering and what the priest has to do. And, you know, it'll go as deep as you want to go with it. But the point is, you discover that you have, well, let's just read this. Leviticus 4:1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of my commandments, the Lord concerning these things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them. If you sin against the Lord and don't really know that you are doing it. It's a sin of ignorance, or Catholics call it what? A sin of omission versus a sin of commission. Well, you still need to draw near to God and get that sin forgiven. He'll forgive it, of course. So it gives you the instructions on how you do that. One of the things, when you bring an animal, you have to lay your hands on it, and then the priest slits the throat of the animal. Well, think about that. That's bound to be a bloody mess. And I'm guessing the animal just doesn't drop to the ground. There's probably some sort of traumatic deal that goes on. So you have your hands on the animal. You're now probably covered in blood. Certainly the priest is covered in blood. And there's more than likely, I mean, I have no experience with this, but I'm guessing there's more than likely there's some sort of traumatic commotion going on. And it is going to affect the heart of the person who has to make the offering. You're going to wish that you had never done what it was you had done that put you in the spot where you had to draw near to God again. Well, that's kind of the message. Adam and Eve, when they were cast from the garden, an animal had to die so that they could be clothed correctly for life outside of the protected area of God's delight. So this animal had to die. And the picture, of course, is the sacrifice of the Lord. He has to die for your sins. This animal had to die for Adam and Eve's sins. And we tend to think in the temple offerings that that's the same picture, that innocent blood had to be shed. And that's probably, there's some truth to it, but the whole point of these offerings in the Mishkan they were korban, to draw near to God, because you realize you have strayed from God. And just like the people at the foot of the mountain who created the golden calf, they didn't know what else to do. They didn't stray on purpose. They were trying to figure it out. And just like with the disciples, when Peter went to Cornelius and all of a sudden discovered that the Lord was calling Gentiles into the crowd, what do we do with them? Well, give them 4 quick instructions, and the rest, they say, they will learn on the Sabbath as they read Moses. So there's a period of time, just like there was for each of us, we come to know the Lord, but we don't know everything about the Lord. As we learn, we can look back and go, oh my gosh, why did I do that? I would never do that now. And there is some event that causes us to need to draw near to the Lord. And for us, that event was the crucifixion of Jesus. That hadn't happened yet in the Old Testament. There had to be a way for people to feel the impact of their sin. And that was the way they did it. It was a visual, visceral, you saw these offerings, you saw what had to happen. But they were not mandatory. You had to make up your own heart that you needed to draw near to God because you had strayed from God. And this was the prescribed way for you to draw near to God. And that's exactly what it says in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language. And this is all about shub and return and teshuvah and repentance and all that stuff. So let me read Leviticus 4:3. If the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. Leviticus 4:22-23, when a ruler hath sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord his God, concerning the things which he should not have done, and is guilty, or if his sin whereupon he has sinned shall come to his knowledge, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. Leviticus 4:27, and if any one of the common people sin through ignorance, while he doeth something against the commandments of the Lord concerning the things which ought not to be done, and be guilty. Leviticus 5:7. If he is not able to bring a lamb, then he shall bring for his trespass which he has committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons unto the Lord, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So we can see that that a man, a priest, a ruler, a poor person, it doesn't matter who you are. You can just as easily commit a sin of omission, commit sin in ignorance, and the repair is the same. It doesn't matter if you're the king of the land, if you're the priest at the tabernacle, if you're the poorest guy living on the street, or if you're just a regular guy. The rules are all the same. And you need to draw near to the Lord. And the way you draw near to the Lord is by making one of these offerings. So you can actually physically see and feel what your sin has done. So for that reason, he built the Mishkan that he could dwell in, and he could dwell with his people, because he wanted his people to be free of sin. And that's in the garden, they first sinned, and sin grew. From that point on, he brings the tabernacle, he moves in with the people, and then he would move out as the people walked away several times until you get to the end where it's the same story. We're back in heaven dwelling with God, but now all sin is forgiven and gone. And it's the same circle, if you will.
That's a picture of grace.